Hello everyone. I'm very pleased to have to introduce today Mariachiara Gasparini, who has received her PhD in Transcultural Studies, Global Art History from the University of Heidelberg in Germany in 2015. She received a master degree in East Asian Art from the Sotheby's Institute of Art in London in 2011, and a magister degree in Oriental Languages and Civilizations from the University of Naples, L'Orientale, in 2005. Her interests include historical, theoretical, and visual investigation in the history of Asian and Eurasian art and culture. She has conducted extensive fieldwork in Asia and has presented the results of her research in conferences and workshops worldwide. From 2012 to 2014, she analyzed and catalogued the Turfan textile collection in the Asian Art Museum in Berlin with the support of the International Dunhuang Project at the British Library. From 2015 to 2017, she taught Asian art at Santa Clara University. She is one of the founder members of the Italian Association of Tibetan, Himalayan, and Mongol Studies, established in September of this year at the University of Oriental Studies in Naples. Currently, she is compiling the Italian annotated bibliography for the 15-year project Buddhist Murals of Kucha on the Northern Silk Road, undertaken at the Saxon Academy of Science in collaboration with the University of Leipzig in Germany.
Thank you very much. Before I start my presentation, I want to just explain a few textile terminology, terms that I will use throughout this paper, because maybe not everyone is familiar with textile terminology. I will try to keep it simple, but you will hear a lot about weft and warp, that are the main threads that are included in a textile ground. We talk about the ground when we talk about textile, that are the vertical lines and horizontal lines, and the three main basic compounds that are basically tabby, that is our basket, that is a simple one, the twill, that is the one that we use for jeans, for example, that is, let's say, half diagonal, and then we have the satin that is made minimum with 5 threads, and is the latest one that appear around the 12th centuries. So these three are the main basic compound to create any type of textiles in this world. So say that, I can start my presentation. So in the Divine Comedy, the Italian poet Dante Alighieri, in describing Giron, the monster of fraud with human face, lion paws, snake body, and scorpion tail, wrote, "With color more, groundwork or broidery, never in cloth did Tartar make, not Turk, nor were such tissues by Arachne laid." The poet clearly referred to a fine, colorful textile production made by Tartar and Turk people that also included the use of embroidery. The comparison with the monster skin underlines not only the high quality of the textile structures known in the late Middle Ages in Italy, but also the difference between West Asian and East Asian textiles. Moreover, the description of the monster in the well-known Italian edition illustrated by Gustave Doré records the macara, or dragonfish, woven on early Liao and coeval Mongol textiles. The word Tartar was generally applied to the majority of textiles produced during the 13th and 14th centuries in the Mongol Empire, without a clear definition of the typology or the material employed in the weaving. It generally referred to the majority of weaving from the East, except for those related to Islamic Mediterranean areas, which were called panni saraceni or Saracen cloths or saracinati, with lightweight plain silk, sometimes woven in a tweed or tabby structure, the first two that I showed you before. It is still unclear whether there is a possible relationship between the term Tartar and the Scottish tartan, a textile with perpendicular crossing band, or checked, identical to the type found on the Tarim mummies and also as fragment from the Turfan areas. A similar possibility may be considered in relation to the mantle of the angel depicted in the Annunciation with Saint Margaret and Saint Anselm by Simone Martini in Lipomeme in Florence. The mantle might be a representation of one of this type described in the inventory of King Philip V of France that lists clothes in silk, in golden silk in the Palace of Louvre. In particular, Tartar in taffetas, golden tartar, tartar, iridescent tartar of Lucca, that are very distinct from Samit, Nasij, or Kimkau, Kamokka. The tartar called taffeta suggests a further development of the simple tabby structure used during the Mongol period. In undyed cotton or other fiber of poor quality, the tabby was originally used as a monastic robe, as observed in the Kizil caves, or to provide a surface for religious subjects dyed or painted on the surface of items to be offered in caves and in temples. Later, polychrome thread and eventually twisted silk thread were refined and employed in that structure known in the West by the name of taffeta. A lining of a sleeve hand in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, made in tabby and twill, is similarly patterned from the Mongol period. Not only is the difference between Tartar and Turkish textile mentioned in the Divine Comedy by Dante, but it's also confirmed in the inventory of the King of France, indeed. Both categories of textile, Tartar and Nasij, were produced in Europe, and the term were often used interchangeably or to name structure that originated in other countries, such as Naks called Turkey, literally Turkish Nak, as it read in the king's inventory. And I quote, "First from the belief to our Lord the King in Escrio on the 20th October 1327, 12 clothes of Turkey, of which 6 big and 6 small. Item 2, Naks called Turkish, which she gave, one to the Santiago de Compostela in Galicia and the other to the Margaret of Lambres." Also, the inventory of the treasury of Pope Boniface VIII, who was Pope from 1294 until his death, lists silk manufacture in Asia Minor, often referred to as tars, which appear in northern European courts around the 14th century. In the 13th century, however, Marco Polo had already mentioned that Armenian and Greek produced Tartar silks under the Turkish rule, and Nakki were also produced by the Turks. Turk possibly imply a general West Asian and Greek production, where terms such as Nakki or Tartar circulated and were adopted according to the personal knowledge of local artisans or to the person who compiled trade and gift lists. In the chronicles of his journey, conducted over a period of 30 years, the traveler Ibn Battuta sometimes used both term nak and asich for a similar type of clothes in golden silk or brocaded in gold. He mentions a piece of nak, a type of cloth with golden embroideries that he received as a gift from the Emir of Ephesus in Turkey. And he also described the clothing of the Khatun, wife of Mohammed Ozbek Khan of the Golden Horde, as a dress of golden silk called the nak, and again a cape of nak cloth also called nasij. But as stated in the Codex Cumanicum, the trilingual glossary of Latin, Persian, Cuman, and Turkic word dated to 1324-25, the terms refer specifically to 2 different types of silk produced in the 13th century that only became popular a century later and were also reproduced in West Asian territories and transmitted into Europe. In La pratica della mercatura, the practicing of trading by Francesco Balducci Pegoletti, the two are also differentiated. Pegoletti records that the type of textiles sold in Constantinople by the piece are velvet of silk and kamukka and marmati, and cloth of gold from every region, and naketti from every region, and nakki from every region, and similarly cloth of gold and silks except for zendadi. From the textual and material sources that I have analyzed in the last 5 years, I can say that different factors lead to the conclusion that nakki and naketti, as well as zendadi, produced in the 13th and 14th centuries, were mostly of Iranian Central Asian origins. During the Yuan dynasty, the Chinese word nashishi which has no literally meanings, was employed as a transliteration of the Persian word nasij, meaning cloth of gold. 3 main different types of golden weaving were produced at the same time, but in spite of their very similar appearance, they were all of different structure. The first is the jinwanzi, gilden silk, referred to tabio twill grounds with a repeating pattern made with golden brocading of lancet decorating weft, or gilden paper thread that is a typical Chinese technique which began to acquire popularity during the Liao dynasty. Among these types, also assembled in the Cleveland Museum of Art that you can see here. The structure of this textile, that is very complicated, is a typical Eastern Iranian technique imported to China during the Liao and Jin period and used to create brocades. The second one is the nashish itself, was a fully decorated lampas in gold, which, unlike the first, could have the weft in cotton rather than in silk. And golden thread made of leather as in Islamic territory, or golden twisted thread, sometimes also employed together in the same structure. Style and motif were generally of Central Asian inspiration. The third one, called jin, is a sort of golden weft face compound developed from the Tang type. One of the features of the new structure was an inner double warp, while the weft system could have a set of 2 or 3 types of thread, also brocading. Apart from the golden set of threads that could be twisted or flat, the others were yellow or brown in order to create a full golden visual effect. In addition to these 3, a 4th type of polychrome weaving classified as sadalachi, most likely developed from the original weft face compound that I showed you before in twill of the 8th century, is a complex lampas. An example of sadalachi might be the piece excavated in Inner Mongolia and dated to the 14th century, which has a repetition of roundels, including a pair of backward-facing griffin, like you can see here. That is a typical pattern of the Mongol period that we can find also in other Eurasian textiles, like the possible Sicilian piece in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Apparently, it was the Persian scientist Jamal ad-Din who first, in 1287, led the weavers of a workshop in Kambalik, Beijing, in the production of sadalachi. This not only clarifies why the majority of Mongol structures that arrived and were reproduced in Europe were not of Chinese origin, but also that sadalachi was the name used to categorize complex structure of double or triple set of warp and weft that most likely originated in Iranian Central Asian territories. Most importantly, textile names Nacchi and Nacchetti are not generally listed in Italian inventories before the 14th century and are clearly distinct from the type called Kamka, Kamoka, Kamuka. You can find all this type of transliteration. Adopted for textile produced exclude the assumption that the Persian kimka, from which the Chinese jinhua and possibly the Italian kamka, kamuko, kamoka, adopted for textile produced from Herat, Damascus, and also Alexandria, as well as other textiles called marmadi, a possible transliteration of the Arabic word maremha, perhaps a golden brocaded ground, could be included in general category of Tartar textile as they were known in late medieval Europe. The Biblioteca Apostolica Vaticana in Rome includes a lengthy list of medieval sources that can help us differentiate those Asian textile structure and pattern imported and reproduced in Italy from those inspired and developed in Europe. Papal inventories, cardinal wills, and clerical treasure lists are among the documents that contain the most descriptions of luxurious medieval textile and that can also be studied as a main point of comparison with the Buddhist reception and use of textile along the Northern Silk Road. Like in Buddhist contexts of Dunhuang and in Turfan, Christian treasures were indeed enriched by gift from believers in exchange for indulgence. The inventory of Pope Boniface VIII represent one of the most valuable documents regarding papal treasures. Part of the treasure, which was offered to the Cathedral of Anagni in Italy, provide an overview of the other parts given to St. Peter. Although the treasure of St. Peter has been lost or looted over the centuries, a few items, like the Politico Stefaneschi made by Giotto for the main altar of the Basilica, have survived. The papal treasure and the Basilica treasure were indeed of two separate types. The inventories of Pope Boniface VIII, as well as of his successor, Pope Benedict XI, who became Pope in 1303, referred to the treasure of Holy See rather than the chapter, capitulum, or ecclesiastic body. This explains why papal treasures were often moved while others remained in the Basilica of St. Peter in Rome and were impoverished or enriched with all kinds of items. According to the Libro dei Benefattori, or Book of Benefactor, during the period of papacy in Avignon, France, the treasure was enriched only by luxurious textiles that were offered as gifts. Around 1367, before the re-establishment of the papacy in Rome, a new inventory of the gift received between 1294 and 1303 was written, and Tartar textiles began to be listed, especially those patterned with the randals and animals. It read, for instance, 2 pluvialia of diaspora in Tartar cloth, panno tartarico, or again, a planeta of white tartar cloth fully decorated with golden refined small work, etc., etc. And again, a small tunic and a dalmatic of tartar cloth, work with the refined small golden pattern, etc., and golden grape leaves, and so on and so forth. On the sleeves, the rim is decorated with a golden cloth pattern with griffin, param, picot, that are all patterns that appear on Mongol textiles. Some fragments with the pattern described above, especially the grape leaves, are held in the Victoria and Albert Museum. In particular, a set of 3 fragments with only leaves or tiny birds, and another with leaves surrounding small animals, all dated to between 1300 and 1350. The fragment might be identified, the first one, as Camucca described in lo Statuto della Corte dei Mercanti in Lucca, del 1376, the regulation of merchant in Lucca. In the Statuto, different types of camucchi are described and are generally sold at the same price of baldachin. Baldachin is a type of textile made in Baghdad and is made of a golden cloth as well. They are woven with small pattern, often foliage, and small animal and birds. The style of these textiles very much recalls a type of lampas, with satin ground and brocading golden weft, produced in Iran in the same period. It is possible that the Italian type was an economical version based on the original luxurious Eastern one listed as Tartar, that one, rather than Camucca, the Italian type, or other name, which was generally brocaded and heavier in weight. Despite the structure, the design of grape leaves, as well as other small types of foliage with little dab, can be dated to the 14th century. The panel of the throne, depicted by Bernardo Daddi in Madonna and Child enthroned with angel and saint in 1334 in the Galleria degli Uffizi in Florence, for instance, provide visual evidence of the use of such luxurious compound woven not only for clothing, but also for the decoration of sacred and religious spaces, like you can see in the throne there. Among the many textiles listed in medieval sources, a type called Catasamito or Catasamito also appears. The etymology of this term can only be speculative. It might perhaps be related to or imitated of a type of samit from Katai, from which the name Catasamit may have derived. Although little information has survived about the structure of these textiles, Samit and Catasamit are differentiated from one another and listed separately in the inventories. For example, 2 sandals with pair of parent purple Samit or Xamito, and the other one, 2 sandals made in purple Catasamit or Cataxamito with roses in gold fillet and pearls and balls. And again, entry 812, 2 dorsali of which one is made of green and red baldachin from Baghdad with pattern of waves like fishbone and various images, figures and animal, and it's hemmed with green samit or xamito. The other is checked with silver thread and red silk, on which checked there are lion. Features that seem to resemble two identical pieces, one in the Dumbarton Oaks in Washington, D.C., and the other one in the Museo of Bargello in Florence, that is this one. And again, a repositarium for the body in red Catasamit, with images of the Majesty sitting on one side and on the other a crucifix and the Holy Mary and John in Thracian gourds. Again, a cape of red samite embroidered in Cyprus work of Ciprensi, with randle in which are griffin and two-headed eagle, etc., etc. Although it is not always clear, these latest two suggest that Catasamit and hexameter, as I said, are two different weaving, both used for sacred vestment of a different type. This description can be only compared to later example of possible similar weaving. The pivale or pluviale of San Nicholas or San Nicola, described in the second, except that is preserved in the treasury of the Cathedral of Anagni, but with no pearls, with the pianeta, this is the name of the vestment, with this frieze embroidered in English style. English style would be this kind of rhombus there, generally, as I say, embroidered. The Cyprus work of Opus Tripense was a specific style of embroidery imported from Cyprus and adopted in Italy. In the papal inventory, more than 30 entries list embroideries in the Cyprus style, which are clearly distinguished from more than other entries listed as Xamiti, Zendadi, Panni Tartarici, Panno de Romania, that will be Byzantine clothes, or Diaspro di Antiochia, Cancio, that is a transliteration of the Islamic conch, and so on. Atabi, Spanish clothes. High-quality textile appear also in the last will of the cardinal, who, since the 12th century, had obtained the licentia testandi, a license to make a will, from the Pope. The first one was released by Pope Celestine III to Cardinal Peter of Piacenza. Originally, the licentia testandi had the aim of protecting the cardinal, who generally came from a high-class family, from the like sovereign who had the right to claim and collect patrimonies ius spolis, but where, during the papacy of Innocent IV, the ius spolis became a right only to the Pope, the licentia testandi was extended to the whole church and to all religious. The patrimonies was divided into money, good and chattel, property, book, and residuum, that means remaining, which were distributed among the poor or small churches and religious institutions. While the Asper, Zendadi, Xamiti, and Badakin had already appeared in this type of document in the 13th century, Nacchi and Nacchetti, as I say, were listed only a century later, as we can read in the will of Niccolò da Prado, which in entry 37 record two sheets to set on the altar, one in green nacco and the other in purple. There is no doubt that beyond any technical similarity that was developed and named, each in a specific territory, Nacco and Nacchetti had a particular structure or two structures that arrived in Europe with the Mongols and was recognized as such. It was with their arrival that Italian textile production was moved from Sicily to Lucca and also to Venice, grew and acquired popularity, and that a new painting movement, which had already begun with Giotto, flourished in Tuscany in the same period and possibly became the main and unquestionable visual evidence of the Mongol material culture in Italy. The term zendado appear often in medieval sources. Apart from the papal inventories dated to 1295, one of the most important documents that mention it, among others, is the last will of Marco Polo held in the Biblioteca Nazionale Marciana in Venice. It lists textile gathered during the permanence of the Venetian merchant in Asia. 3 pieces of camok and zendadi, work in Tartar style, 2 pieces of white zendadi from Katai, and 1 yellow zendadi from Katai. Apparently, the Tartar and the Chinese style were also very different from each other. These few bits of information gathered from medieval inventories, however, do not really clarify the type of weaving structure that Lisa Monness, a textile historian, identified with the lightweight plain silk used for linings or embroidered decoration, but that recorded as a sandal also seem very similar to a samit. In 1852, Francisque Michel said, and I quote, "A silk fabric employed mostly with the samit during the second half of the Middle Ages is the sandal, sendé, sendé, sendex, or sandal, as the writers in Low Latin call it, and from the 19th century by even more names. The sandal, if not the same as the samit, differ from a little from it, so that the two fabrics can be confused. We can say that the sandal was a type of taffetas. The sandal was especially from other territories, and not only did the sandal come from the Orient through the Mediterranean Sea, it also arrived from the Black Sea, hence the name sandal of Russia. This sandal comes from China and India, where its manufacture was widespread, as was recorded by Marco Polo. While the zendado is recorded as a monochrome weaving, other textiles listed in the last will of Marco Polo feature roses, strange animals, or checked patterns. These can be found among the weavings that have survived today, especially those used for liturgical vestment or that we can see depicted in Italian paintings. The majority of textiles in Italian or European collection that came from Asia and are datable to between the 13th and 14th century are Central Asian or West Asian. Nevertheless, the style of manufacture of just a few can be identified as possibly Chinese. Among those is a lancé lampas of green ground with flower in yellow of a metal thread, which was used as the lining of the mitre of Bishop Oddone da Colonna, up there. This floral pattern also records the type used for the dalmatic found in St. Nicholas Church in Stralsund and another one in the Brandenburg Cathedral, both in Germany. It is most likely that the mitre was created at the beginning of the 13th century, when this kind of embroidery pattern were widely produced in central Italy, the external one. However, it is not unusual to find early compounds employed in 14th and 15th century clothing combined with other weaving datable to a different period or traceable to a different production. Many entries in the papal inventory of 1295 correspond to surviving textile fragments that are generally dated to a later period. An exception that can explain this phenomenon is the regalia preserved in the Church of San Domenico in Perugia, attributed to Pope Benedict XI, who during his papacy donated it to the church. Today, the dalmatic of the Pope appears as a kind of patchwork constructed over time in a cut-and-paste process that saw the substitution of part of the original compound for smaller pieces of different types of weavings of Asian origin, most likely panni tartarici and local embroideries. Many other items were also added to the original regalia over the centuries. In the 20th centuries, there was the habit of cutting liturgical vestments, including those belonging to Pope Benedict XI, into smaller pieces to make sacred relics to worshipmen. This explained the large number of textile fragments preserved in museums worldwide, and also the recycling process of old and new weaving in the recreation of liturgical vestment, like the regalia held in Perugia that most likely was originally made with textile from the papal treasury, which at that time was stored between Perugia and Assisi in central Italy. By contrast, the regalia of Cangrande Primo della Scala, Cangrande the first of the Scala family, discovered in his tomb in Verona in 1921, which for structure and styles appear very similar to the compound that composed the dalmatic of Benedict XI, was found intact as originally assembled. Without context, this remained one of the most important discoveries of the last century in Italy, studied and presented to the public only in 1983 when the city of Verona organized an exhibition in the Sala Boggian di Castelvecchio for the 6th centenary of Dante Alighieri's death. In 2004, the city of Verona decided to reopen the Ark of Cangrande and to reanalyze its body, textile, and other material. The new data were compared with the previous one, which were not completely reliable. The compounds from the Ark of Cangrande are of particular importance because they were found cut in the shape of funerary clothing, a cape, a dress, and a long-sleeved tunic on the body of the deceased without being sewn. This has not only permitted the reconstruction of the composition as a whole, which is sometimes very difficult to achieve from fragments only, but has also suggested the rapid death of Cangrande and the presence of Asian textiles in the Scala family treasury that were used for the occasion but not refined due to a fast and unexpected death. The collection of the panni tartarici at the court of the Scala family legitimated its power among the most important Italian noble families in the Middle Ages and the possibility of acquiring the best luxury compound in circulation at the time. Due to the lack of written document, I had to confine myself here to the ornamental data of the compounds and the technical analysis undertaken in Lyon in 1983 and a few further data added in 2004. Although the visual ornamental comparison with the Chinese and Iranian coeval media always provide great support, it was the technique employed that contributed more information about a possible provenance. It seems evident that the majority of the weaving could not be identified as Islamic, which means that they could be ascribed not to the Muslim workshop in West Asia or Egypt, but rather to Chinese workshop, or more likely to Central Asian and Eastern Iranian workshop familiar with that specific technique that characterized the compounds of Cangrande. The question, nonetheless, is much more complex, and the roots of the ornamental data analyzed in the related exhibition catalogue, generally attributed to the Han or Tang China period, can instead be found in a Central Asian and Mongol archaic imagery that has not been considered to date. Nashish and Jin technique, previously discussed, can provide the answer to some of the questions regarding the type of structure employed for the majority of Cangrande textiles. The textiles that compose the majority of the funerary clothing have two series of warp, main, and binding, and two or more series of weft with a maximum of 4, and are all said to be brocaded with metallic membranes. Three main terms seem to be as the most appropriate for the classification of these compounds: the asper, samit, and lampas, also called broccatello. That is a type of textile that belonged to the family of lampas in Italy. Nonetheless, the second one, samit, seems to be the structure that best explains the combination and the sequence of warps and weft of the textile under examination. The samit, which is the name given to the weft-faced compound tweed, differ from the diaspora in the work of the weft that create a larger and more complex pattern. Finally, the lampas, which was a later compound developed from the samit and was very popular in the 13th century, required at least 2 warp and a minimum of 3 weft for each pattern. This explanation is based mainly on the Italian medieval terminology that often refer to general effect of the compounds, most of which were reproduced on Asian prototype with the local material, and try to classify an unknown weaving that in some way appears similar to other already classified as diaspora, samit, and lampas, terms that technically define most of the panni tartarici. Moreover, because the technique and color of the Italian diaspora lampas differ slightly from the Asian types, the textiles of the Scala family were classified all as a samit. In Italy, however, these textiles have not found a proper technical name, but they seem to correspond to those Nashishi and Jin previously discussed, which had similar technical features and created a golden effect on the ground. Among the textiles discovered in the Ark of Cangrande, 4 in particular represent those technical and stylistic developments that had occurred in Central Asia for more than 7th century, from the 7th to the 14th century, and that can also be seen as prototype of most Italian weaving that employ part of the original patterns in similar composition or in new personal typology, like a koine or lingua franca that characterized the production of the Mongol period. One of the 4 textiles is a compound similar to the robe of the angel in the Annunciation by Simone Martini and Lippo Memmi, this one, which is a white ground with golden flower motif and small animal. The golden membrane thread were originally made in silver. However, the textiles that are similar to the type under examination that have survived today have golden membrane thread. Comparable to these are a few other fragments with golden thread identified as a lampas and tabin, and all most likely produced in Central Asia between the 13th and 14th centuries. These, however, unlike the type from the Ark of Cangrande, show no images of animals. Nonetheless, the identification of each singular pattern in the composition is difficult to achieve. The reconstruction of the composition on the textile discovered in the Ark of Cangrande was in fact possible thanks to the decodification, reproduction on a diagram, of all the elements that at first glance seems to be a small part of a big foliage composition, but eventually appear as a sequential row of repeated duck or geese and a row of alternating lions and hares, and all enclosed in a grid of leaves. Similar small animals are also depicted in a second well-preserved textile discovered on the bottom of the Ark of Cangrande, and recalling the sequence of animals like those on a Scythian phalera dated to the 5th century BCE. The cloth, which in 2004 was identified as from Azerbaijan, as a great ground with a sequence of lobe rhombi enclosing four different types of golden palmettos or lotus flower on a silver ground, all joined by a roundel enclosing the endless knot, typical of Chinese and Tibetan culture, and surrounded by mirrored and ascending hares and lion and descending fish and crown. This complex composition seems to be a cosmogonic interpretation of the four seasons that not only links each animal to one of the four elements, fire, lion, earth, hare, water, fish, and air, crown, but would also suggest the passage of time through the use of gold and silver as possible symbolic representation of sun and moon. The clothes that cover his body in the Ark is not only the most damaged, but probably the most representative of the funerary goods as a whole, which brings us to the discovery of many other fragments with at least one of the patterns woven on its ground or developed from there. Although not simple to identify due to damage, pattern and structure have been deduced thanks to the comparison with well-preserved dalmatic and tunic held in Regensburg, Germany, that show very similar composition, including the endless knot. Among the patterns on this textile, the images of two Chinese Tibetan snow lion playing with a ball in the shape of a Chinese wushu coin is also featured. The image is one of those developed in Chinese territory during the Liao and Song period, and it's linked to the image of Manjushri, the bodhisattva of wisdom, who is often depicted sitting on a blue or white lion. A similar lion appeared on one of the pieces that compose a tunic from Stralsund dated to the 5th century, but possibly an early textile reused a century later in that cut and paste process for making new clothing as previously mentioned. Again, drop-shaped motif or palmettos regularly appear as a singular repeated frame of animals in pairs as foliage or to fill gaps in the composition. The funerary clothing of Cangrande always includes this element combined with others in many variations. However, the remaining textile that was supposed to be the external dress shows a unique composition of this pattern. It is a red ground with a repetition of ad pinus, pine cone, as it is known in Italian medieval sources, surrounded by foliage. The pine cones woven on this textile enclose a kind of flower similar to one of the type depicted in the aforementioned lobe medallion framed by animals, which are also similar to those on a surviving shoes of Pope Benedict XI, and which frame a pair of backward hairs, a motif that was widely reproduced in Lucca. To conclude, although we do not know what material evidence can be related to the will of Marco Polo, and the treasure of Cangrande, the first of the Scala family, leaves unanswered question that even advanced methodology and investigation have not been able to solve, historical data, visual comparison of the ornamental data between textile and paintings, and technical comparison of material and technique cannot deny the great impact that Central Asian textile imagery had on Europe, and in particular on Italian art. More than a transcultural process, it was a real process of incorporation that caused all the graphic elements discussed here to be so well assimilated in the local Italian patrimony as to become indiscernible. The production of painting from the 12th to the 15th century, especially that from Siena and Florence, reproduced most of the Asian textile patrimony, which, because employed mostly for local Christian images, became Italian. Morphologic symbols moved in a different context beyond their original territories, permitting the creation of a new artistic and stylistic patrimony, or sometimes a static setup that was erased with time or reproposed in a new form, as occurred during the Mongol period and in the earlier Italian textile production. It seems clear that the popular Tartar textile referred to a variety of weaving structure, especially in gold, produced in the vast Eurasian area from Central Asia to Italy, sometimes similar, if not identical, to each other. Only China remained unique in its style. As a matter of fact, both China and Italy had their own textile terminology, which sometimes referred to common structure, although patterns were often adapted to indigenous material that changed the ground of the weaving process slightly, and that consequently created new form and new terms. The decodification of a large amount of data cannot be univocal, but necessitates a linguistic, semantic, technical, and visual analysis that can help to at least differentiate the Tartar from Saracen and Chinese textile. Nevertheless, thanks to Giotto, Jacopo di Cione, Simone Martini, Lippo Memmi, and Bernardo Daddi, just to mention a few painters, the textile imagery developed in various areas of Eurasia, and in particular those Tartar clothes produced in Central Asian territories, acquired a universal understanding that was secularized in Buddhist, Islamic, and Christian worlds. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much. I really appreciate it. You can't hear me. This is often the case. In 1997, a book came out by a guy named Thomas Olson that was on commodity and exchange material culture in the Mongol Empire. And this really transformed Mongolian studies in a way from ideas and shooting people and conquest and all of this to the guts of the thing and what was really going on. It really gave us an insight to what was happening. And since that very beneficial work, not all that long ago really, there's been a lot of work done in archives here and there explicating the textile industry and its importance during this period of time. Maria's work is incredibly important in that it takes that work that's of the Mongol Empire and brings it into Western history and Western study, the extension of that. And as excited as I was to read this book in 1997, I'm more excited now to hear your talk, because it's really a revolutionary thing. It does tremendous good, and it rights a bunch of wrongs. One wrong that it rights is the idea that the Mongols have no influence in the world, and especially on Europe, which of course is quite wrong. This is a kind of general and profound wrong. But it also rights a number of very specific wrongs. And one of them has to do with Cangrande della Scala's burial tunic. So this is wonderful work. There's a journal on Dante called Dante Studies. It's quite good, and I think it was founded by Longfellow, who did an early wonderful translation of Dante into English. And they have one issue dedicated specifically to Dante and Islam. And in that they have an article on the opening of the tomb of Cangrande della Scala and this burial clothing that he wore. And they say in that text that had to have come from the Sultan of Baghdad, which was in Cairo, and the Mamluk Sultan of Egypt. It had to come from there. This is a kind of mistake that they make with Dante in Asia any number of different times. But reading that, I knew that that couldn't be true. It just couldn't be true because, for one, there was a trade embargo during this period with the Mamluks. So Europe was doing its trading with the Ilkhanate. So that's one thing. The other thing is the people doing this trade were Cangrande's family. So his name, I'll just tell you a little story, is a triple pun. His name is Cangrande. Cangrande. That means, what is it supposed to mean? The
Great Khan.
Well, yeah, thank you. You got it. But the first thing is, and you stole my thunder. But thank you. That's exactly right. The first one is great dog. And not just because their family crest was a great dog and whatever it was, but and so once you get to a great dog, it's not just any great dog. There's a symmetry between heaven and earth, and if you have on earth a great dog, what's the great dog up in the sky? Does anyone know? Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, Sirius. So that's two. And the third one is exactly as you say, Cangrande. And that's the real name. He's named for the great Khan. And in his life, that's Kublai Khan. He's named for Kublai Khan. Their family is doing business with the Mongols. And so, anyway, I saw that back whenever that came out, and I knew that it was wrong, but I only knew it a priori, or in my mind it has to be wrong. It can't be right. Now we know for certain that it is. And so that's just one of any number of things that I learned, and I appreciate it. I'll stop and open it up for questions, but thank you.